Presentation, I want to say a few things about some aspects of IBM Watson's information retrieval. And again, sort of highlighting just how smart the team was in engineering their system. So they didn't just sort of like, as I mentioned before, blindly download all of the internet. They downloaded or captured information that was highly curated. Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, newspaper articles, things like that. But even then, they sort of like categorized or classified different types of documents. So here are three of them, just to give you a sense. One of them they called TODs, Title-Oriented Documents. And the idea is that the title of the document is a concept or a named entity. And we'll see an example here in a moment, like Merle Haggard is the example we're going to look at. and then the whole body discusses the entity. And by title and body, they literally mean the title HTML tag and the body HTML tag that we have seen. So again, Wikipedia is a great example of this thing, but there are others. So they created a search index for all TODs, I guess. If there is a keyword sometime during the search, then that matches one of those things, that certainly will be very helpful. They all use, by the way, they also use anchor tags, href tags, to sort of realize that, oh, wait a minute, this anchor tag talks about some entity, some concept, and so they assumed that that document was going to be relevant about that. Others are passage search documents, so journals, magazines, books, encyclopedias, web data. So think about journals or magazines. A lot of times the title, is sometimes catchy, but doesn't necessarily reference an entity. And then, even though in the introduction we mentioned that IBM Watson is designed to handle natural language input, and that IBM needs to process natural language input, they were still not just leaving it at that. They took actually a lot of the information that they read in and processed it to put it into databases as well as ontologies, because they are just faster to process. I mean, you just can't beat it. It's just so much faster than doing, searching through a document or something like this. And so that's kind of really nice. Nevertheless, there are databases that are available. So DBpedia, which is based on Wikipedia's box entries that you typically find on the right, Freebase and others. So here's an example of a document where the title has and the answer, Merle Haggard. And so this was actually a clue during Jeopardy. This country singer was in prison for robbery, and in 1972 was pardoned by Ronald Reagan. And unfortunately, this is too small, but it pretty much mentions that over here in these two passages. And so the title is Merle Haggard. So notice that they're asking really which country singer, or name the country singer, blah, blah, blah. But it gets better than that. Again, an example of just how smart these people are. They were able to determine that about 95% of Jeopardy answers occur in Wikipedia document titles. So, challenge for you, right? I mean, write a Jeopardy player just simply based on the titles of Wikipedia entries. So, I guess you could do that. So let me say a few things about some of the processing that is going on. So here's an example of a clue. The category is Michigan Mania. And the clue is, in 1894, C.W. Post created this warm cereal drink, Postum, in this Michigan city. So as I mentioned before, the first thing they try to figure out is, what does Alex Trebek want to know? And what's the lexical answer type? And so they were able to determine that the lexical answer type is not just a city, but it's a Michigan city. So, right. I mean, the more information we have, the better it is. So the primary search returns a bunch of cities. Here's just a small sample of them. Undoubtedly, there were probably thousands. And notice that not all of them are actually cities. So General Foods, Battle Creek, we know is a city. Post Foods, that's not a city. Will Keith Kellogg, that's not a city. So lots of stuff that we find out on our initial search. So notice that even though these do not necessarily satisfy the lexical answer type, there's some hypothesis generation. So they sort of like take some of this information and whittle it down, so to speak, to some hypotheses. And as I mentioned before, now comes the second stage where they take some of these things and put them into this clue and then look for this thing. So they would say, for example, in 1894, C.W. Post created this worm, C.O. Drink Postum in Battle Creek. And they look for look for sentence. Now, you probably don't find the sentence literally, but they have some tools that they develop where they are able to match sentences even though the structure of the sentence is different. So answer scoring, so they have all these answers, right? And I showed you a slide last time where there were arrows from each of the individual components from earlier in the processing pipeline. Some of them are over here, to the final merging and answering component. And so this is actually a huge spreadsheet, so to speak, of information. And so notice that the values are not necessarily large. So these are values that they associate, or confidence values, with each of these answers. And so the doc ranking component, gave these. The passage ranking component gave these. Geography component, geography reasoning, spatial reasoning gave these. So you have this huge thing. Now, we participated in a competition that IBM Watson put on several years ago, and they, as I mentioned before, they used the logistic regression as the final scoring unit. They trained a model, and they weren't 100% sure whether this was the right choice. So they asked, so they created this competition. And as part of the competition, we got some data. Now, the data was, to me, completely meaningless. It was numbers. There were no tags, no human readable tags. But what I can tell you is that we had about 200 columns. So I don't know how realistic that thing is, but I also suspect that it's probably pretty realistic. So they probably had at least 200 different components that processed information. Again, the rows were, it was a big document, what can I say? So what they do then is they run all this data through their logistic regression trained model, the machine learning model, and it determines, based on all these confidences, that Battle Creek is it. So notice that Battle Creek has a very high confidence, much, much higher than all the other ones. So what they would say is that, the answer is Battle Creek. Here's another thing that they do. So here's an example that, look at these candidate answers for whatever question it was. That, there's John F. Kennedy, there's Kennedy, JFK International Airport. So certainly, let's assume that all of these here refer to a person. Again, think about named entity recognition, which might recognize that something is a person, or lexical answer type might recognize that, oh, they're looking for a person, and they can certainly use that component throughout their system. So we should be able to sort of like merge all this information that's related to this thing. Again, that's something that they did. All right, that's just a quick introduction about a very high-level view of some of the information retrieval processing they did. I'll talk to you later. Bye.